Hey, what's going on, guys? It's me, Jay. I'm back with another video. Sad news to report, as many people can see from the title of the video. Ozzy Osbourne has passed away today, um, at the age of 76 years old. He is perhaps the most legendary person or figure, or one of the most legendary figures in the world of rock and roll, in moving the genre along uh, to heavy metal, the type of genre that is uh, popular, more popular and more influential, along with punk rock, as the two main genres of modern day rock and roll. He was born in 1948 in uh, Wicketshire, England. His father was working class. He worked on the docks for a while, and Ozzy got into some trouble. He robbed a clothing store when he was a teenager, and he was unable to pay. uh, he was unable to pay the fine, and his dad wasn't going to pay it for him. So he said, "You know what? You're going to a young man's penitentiary." And he went there. And there, he did uh, some stage acting, so he brushed up on his theatrical performances, something that would serve him rather well when he had his music career, later on in the 70s. And this is 1963. He first hears the Beatles, She Loves You. And it's at that time, in that boys' home, that Ozzy figured out, hey, you know what? I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. I'm going to perform rock and roll. At this time, the British invasion, the eyes of the music world were on Great Britain because of the influence that the Beatles had. So Ozzy, when he forms his first band, his initial band, uh, a gentleman by the name of Geezer Butler, and he formed their first band called Rare Breed, and that's their initial name. But what Ozzy started to notice was that a lot of people would be attracted to him when he would do his occult stuff. So there was a movie out at the time called Black Sabbath, and he takes this name, the name of the band, Black Sabbath. And this he forms his band in August of 1979. So throughout the 70s, he releases three albums. Together with them. Paranoid, Master of Reality, and Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. That is one in one in 1970, one in 1971, and one in 1973. By 1979, Ozzy is gone from the band, and because of his drugs and alcohol abuse, he's they don't want him anymore. You know what I mean? He's revolutionized rock and roll. He's revolutionized the music, made it a lot heavier, made it a lot grittier, made it the themes a lot darker. A lot of their songs are political. I love the two Black Sabbath songs that I really love are War Pigs, and War Pigs is very political, and Iron Man. is awesome. Now, how I got to love Iron Man was being a big wrestling fan, of course, as you guys know I am. The Road Warriors. The Road Warriors would come out to Iron Man, and I love that song. In War Pigs, I got to love that song because of my uncle. He introduced me to that song, and I fell in love with that song. And another one is Crazy Train. Crazy Train is another favorite of mine from Ozzy because that song, there's a song, Twista, Little John, and Twista and Little John do a hip hop remake to it. They sample it. That 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 beginning, and they sampled that little piece. And through their song, I discovered the original song, which is Crazy Train, which I love. My Mom Coming Home is a song that he released in the 1990s. No More Tears is another song that he released in the early 1990s that I really love. When Ozzy wanted to do those ballads, he was pretty good with that as well. Obviously, he's known more for his on-stage antics, like biting a bat, biting the head of a, biting the head of a bat, biting the head off a bird. He was doing a fake bat for a while, but somebody tossed him a live bat, and he did it anyway. In the 2000s, he reinvented himself because here he was, this aging rocker. And one of the things he did in the 90s, to backtrack a little bit, that was pretty cool, was that he started Ozfest, which shined a light on newer heavy metal acts, and that was cool in the 2000s because it was kind of a renaissance of heavy metal. Heavy metal music was popular in the 1970s. Like I said, Black Sabbath was one of those bands that they introduced heavy metal music to the world. Them and Led Zeppelin, those two bands, and it was really popular in the early 70s. But by the late 70s, music taste had changed, and in the rock world, punk rock was taking over, a more stripped down, less virtuosic, less musical, talent, less musical solos, less guitar solos, less musical virtuosos. In punk rock, really a stripped down version of rock and roll music had emerged coming out of New York City with the Ramones, and also London with the Clash by that time. And then of course, disco became popular too in the late 70s, also coming out of New York, thanks to movies like Saturday Night Fever, for example. So heavy metal kind of died down. Then heavy metal in the mid 80s, thanks to another British wave invasion by Def Leppard in their album Pyromaniac, hair metal came to be. And hair metal basically dominated from the mid 1980s to the early 1990s, the early MTV generation. Bands like Van Halen, bands like Motley Crue, and the guys like Ozzy experienced a renaissance because they were heavy metal, hard rock. They were the originals. So now everybody's listening to heavy metal and hard rock, and people are paying attention to them again. But then by the early 1990s, grunge comes on the scene out of Seattle with Nirvana's Nevermind and Pearl Jam's 10. And by that time, everybody's into grunge, everybody's into the Seattle scene, alternative groups like REM. They were out in the 80s, but they've become popular in the 90s, and heavy metal kind of dies down again. So people, stop paying attention to Ozzy, for example, and heavy metal groups. But by the early 2000s, new metal is on the scene. New metal is kind of a combination of hip hop and electronica music, and heavy metal, and a little bit of punk too, so thrown in there a little bit, you know. And he develops the Ozfest to spotlight these new heavy metal acts like Korn, like Limp Bizkit, like Deftones, like Linkin Park. Linkin Park performed their first musical fest in at his um, at his musical fest in the early 2000s. So he was really using his platform to spotlight a lot of heavy metal artists because, of course, he would, right? But I first became aware of him. I didn't grow up listening to heavy metal music at all. Like I said, Crazy Train was introduced to me through a hip hop sample. My Mom Coming Home was introduced to me by a friend from camp named James Futrell. Um, and War Pigs and Iron Man. Iron Man was introduced to me through wrestling, and War Pigs was introduced to me through my uncle, who was a fan of 1970s hard rock, Ozzy Osbourne, the original Ozzy Osbourne, Black Sabbath. You know what I mean? So I didn't grow up with it, so I didn't know anything about Ozzy. I first discovered Ozzy from watching Behind the Music. The Behind the Music on him, and I found him to be crazy. I found him to be a tremendous performer, and like I said, like a British Alice Cooper. Like America had Alice Cooper, England had Ozzy Osbourne, and his image transcended heavy metal and rock and roll because of the reality show. The reality show, which had two spin-offs, basically focused on his family, Sharon Osbourne, his wife. We have a video on her where she defends Piers Morgan's comments about Meghan Markle when Piers Morgan said some off-the-wall racist shit about Meghan Markle. We got on Sharon Osbourne about that. But Kelly Osbourne, became famous. Jack Osbourne, his son. We basically got to know the whole family, and it became an avenue for aging celebrities from previous eras to get reinvigorated. Ozzy Osbourne had his show, obviously a play on Ozzy and Harriet, the 1950s sitcom, right? But a whole new generation got introduced to Ozzy Osbourne through the show. And maybe went back and they discovered his music. You know what I mean? And what he meant to rock and roll. He was inducted in the Hall of Fame twice, 2004 and as a soloist, and 2006 as a member of Black Sabbath. Later on, Black Sabbath did reunite. They did come back together for a slight reunion tour, later on. One of the other things that he did that was infamous was in 1982, he urinated on the Alamo. And then this caused a huge controversy because here's this guy, he's from Britain, he's not American, right? And people look at him, people go like, oh, he's disrespecting the United States, this famous historic landmark, this place where a lot of Americans died. I mean, the Alamo, that was the battle cry of the Mexican-American War. That was, remember the Alamo. General Santana of Mexico, killing all those innocent Tejanos, American citizens, Texans of American descent at that time because Texas was part of Mexico. And here comes Ozzy Osbourne, pissing on it, disrespecting it, urinating on it. It's like he urinated on the Statue of Liberty or he urinated on the White House, And then people are like, how would he feel if, an American went up to Westminster Abbey or Buckingham Palace, some famous landmark in British history, and urinated on that? They wouldn't like it. So Americans didn't like it when it came to Ozzy, but Ozzy always had detractors. In the Kevin Sullivan video, we talked about the satanic panic that was associated with heavy metal music and the rise of heavy metal music. A lot of that had to do in the late 70s, had a lot of that had to do with Black Sabbath, because Black Sabbath was introducing um, devilish themes to music. You know what I'm saying? In some level, in rock and roll, the devil has always been present. You know what I mean? You go back to the original origins of rock and roll, which are in the blues. Supposedly, Robert Johnson made a deal with the devil. He made a deal with the devil, and that made him be a great guitarist. Well, I don't know if Tommy Iommi, who's the guitarist for Black Sabbath, made a deal with the devil, but he was definitely a hell of a guitarist. James Dio of Black Sabbath was the first one to come up with this symbol. And this symbol right here, this symbol came to epitomize rock and roll. He took it from Italian culture, in Italian/Sicilian culture, because that was his background. In Italian/Sicilian culture, this is used as a way to ward off evil spirits, particularly the evil eye. So used in a lot of Mediterranean cultures, and he used it in rock and roll, and it became the ultimate symbol of rock music. But yeah, you know, he married his wife Sharon Osbourne in the late 1970s. For wrestling fans, this kind of intersects with wrestling a little bit. He made an appearance at WrestleMania 2. He was in the corner of the British Bulldogs, you know, representing his country against the dream team of Brutus Beefcake and Greg the Hammer Valentine. But anyway, rest in peace to Ozzy Osbourne. And one of the craziest things too, Ozzy just got off tour. His final tour was in July of 2025. He just got off tour. And a lot of people were looking at the BBC. They were looking at various news stations, TMZ, to see if this was really true, because Ozzy meant a lot to a lot of people. You know, like I said, even though I didn't grow up listening to his music, I do like certain songs. The song I was talking about, that's hip hop, that sample Crazy Train, was Trick Daddy. It had Lil Jon and it had Twista on it. It's called Let's Go. And me and my friends, we used to in the mid 2000s, we would listen to this song a lot. You know what I'm saying? We would love that part where he goes, I, and we didn't even know that that little part, that I was from Crazy Train, because none of us listened to rock. And then finally, the girl I was dating at the time, Vicky's mom, Alex, she was interested in it. She knows about Black Sabbath, likes heavy metal. She's like, that's from Crazy Train. And then she let me hear it. I'm like, oh shit, I love that song. So I did grow up with some of his music, but more so I grew up with him as a media celebrity, being in a reality show, The Osbournes. You know what I mean? So which was taking the world by storm in the early 2000s. There were two shows on TV taking the world by storm. One was The Sopranos, and the other was The Osbournes. So rest in peace to Ozzy Osbourne. Condolences to his family. Like I said, I don't have much to say. You know, being that I wasn't a huge fan of his music. I was hoping that one of you guys, would hop on here and, add a little bit more to what I'm saying as far as, being a fan of heavy metal and rock. But I know what he meant to the music industry and what he meant to rock and roll. So hope you're rocking in heaven. The Prince of Darkness, Ozzy Osbourne. Rest in peace, my friend. You know what I mean? I feel like you were really funny and you really went out of your way to really make it a wild and crazy experience. And I think the reason why they came and them coming after you and them coming after rock music in general, um, made and him fighting against it made him a pioneer for free speech. I'll often say in this country, um, it is music, the music industry, the music business, and musicians that really push a lot of agendas forth, a lot of libertarian type liberal agendas with the way that they challenge the status quo of the day. And he definitely did that in the late 70s with the invention of rock and roll and introducing occult themes in rock and roll, or reintroducing, as it were. So rest in peace to him. Condolences to his family. Thank you guys for contributing.